I'm just going to, oh, that was loud. I don't know if you heard that, but I'm recording this as well. So welcome very much to the Ketogenic Diet Workshop. I decided to have a webinar because it makes it a little easier for people if they prefer not to go out, particularly with COVID. It's going a little bit rampant at the moment, so I'm sure you probably feel more comfortable at home. You might even have your fluffy slippers on. So it's lovely to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to going through all my information with you on the ketogenic diet and how to do that in a healthy way. So what I'm going to do, I'll be sharing my screen on and off to show you my PowerPoint presentation, and at the same time, as I said, you'll be able to ask questions and I'll be able to get back to you on those. Hopefully that works when I share my screen. We'll have a look. So I might just start telling you a bit about myself. I'm the naturopathic nutritionist at Remedy Wellness, and I've been in practice, gosh, since about 1997. I was first in practice in Sydney because I'm a Sydney gal, and I was working in a practice in the CBD in Sydney for some years, and that was before I moved to Perth, and that was in 2002, 20 years ago. And so I've really loved living in Perth. It's such a beautiful lifestyle. And it's a great place to be able to practice as well, because I think Perth really lends itself to a healthy lifestyle. So with the ketogenic diet, I've always been interested in it with helping my patients with weight loss, and also, you know, for patients with a borderline diabetes type 2, or you know, other various problems that I'll talk about during the presentation. But more in particular lately, when I've been helping patients prevent cognitive decline, maybe design to improve their design, and to prevent cognitive decline, and for also those patients that I see with diagnosed early onset Alzheimer's. And I'll explain more why that helps as we go along. So I'll just start sharing my screen. So first of all, bear with me just a tick. And then I just have to make sure that's there, and off we go. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. And so first of all, why go keto? That's a good question. So there's all kinds of reasons that I might recommend somebody go on a ketogenic diet. And so one of the good things about it is that you can reduce your muscle, reduce your body fat, but retain muscle mass. So one of the risks with going on a weight loss kind of diet is that you can lose muscle mass. And of course, if you lose muscle mass, you're likely to lose metabolism, or your metabolism is likely to slow down. And that's because your muscle mass is your most calorie burning tissue in the body, or kilojoule burning. And the other thing is, you know, losing muscle mass, you lose strength as you get older, and it's not very helpful in the long run. So another reason is PCOS. So PCOS is polycystic ovary syndrome, and also acne. So the ketogenic diet can be really useful for people with acne, particularly if it's in relation to problems with their blood glucose metabolism. And so PCOS is very much tied up with blood glucose metabolism issues. And so it's the perfect kind of diet to try first if you have that health problem. Improving cognitive function. So the way that it does improve cognitive function is that some people find that if they're actually on the ketogenic diet, that the way that their body produces the fatty acids or ketones helps to fire their brain much better than the glucose for energy. And so that can be because of various things such as the way that the energy actually gets into the cells of the brain. And if the person has insulin resistance, then the glucose can't actually get into the cells of the brain. So banish brain fog. So a lot of people can find that they get brain fog, or they can feel too sedated after eating heavy carbohydrates. And that's also tied up with insulin resistance, but it can be also tied up with a whole bunch of other things, such as intolerance to any of the grains and so forth. So the ketogenic diet can really help to improve that. Improving your metabolism. Now, the reason for that is that protein is the food that will boost your metabolism the most, followed by a carbohydrate, followed by fat. So even though the ketogenic diet is quite high in fat, or it can be, then the fact that you're having a good amount of protein and not too many carbohydrates can really help to boost your metabolism. It definitely reduces your risk of diabetes type 2, and there's been quite a bit of research showing how the diabetes can be improved with being on a ketogenic diet. And simply it's that when you have diabetes type 2 risk, then that can affect how your body can manage the blood glucose, and it creates more insulin. By reducing the carbohydrates, you're actually reducing that load on the system, and your body is not having to try to deal with so much glucose, and so therefore the whole process that's gone a bit haywire can calm down, and the body can function much better. It also reduces cardiovascular disease risk, particularly if you have a more healthy ketogenic diet. So there's various kinds where, you might have seen, I don't know if you've looked, but some of the ketogenic diets are full of cream cheese and butter and lard and all sorts of animal or saturated fats. And that doesn't really suit everybody. It might suit some people okay, but let's say if you have a cardiovascular disease risk, then you'd want to take care with the saturated fats. And I'll go into that a lot more a bit later. It reduces your fasting blood glucose, of course. It helps to reduce sugar cravings, and that can be really useful if you're a bit of a sweet tooth. And it helps to reduce C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker, very much linked with systemic inflammation in the body, and also cardiovascular disease, and also Alzheimer's, but not necessarily for everybody, depending on their genetic makeup. HbA1c is a diabetes marker. And it's helpful for specific types of cancer, and in particular, things like brain cancer, it's very useful for. And it helps to reduce sleep apnea. Now, the reason it would help to reduce sleep apnea is weight loss, and also reducing any of that inflammatory process that can go on with carrying extra weight around the tummy. For some people, particularly children, it can be used for epilepsy, obviously under supervision, but there's so much research to support that with kids with epilepsy in helping to reduce the amount of seizures that they have. And also reflux. You might have heard of gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GORD. In America, it's GERD because they keep the O off the esophageal. And reflux can be part of an issue with the way that the body digests carbohydrates, where they might become fermented. And then that causes that kind of rise of gas up through the stomach and the esophagus. So that's why it would help with reflux, and also because you'd be removing the types of foods that might cause that problem to start off with. It can help to reduce joint pain. So a lot of people have food intolerances that they're not aware of that can be quite inflammatory for the joints. And just losing weight, of course, will help reduce that stress on the joints. Weight loss. So that's a simple reason why you might go on a ketogenic diet. Also improved energy, and initially I'll talk about what you might expect when you first go on a ketogenic diet, but generally improved energy is the report. So here we've got a bit of a pie chart, very simple, on making sure you have like a good quantity of low carb vegetables, which I'll go into detail later, a portion of protein and some healthy fats. I seem to be stuck. So there we go. I think my little keypad's just spat the dummy. So, okay, so a ketogenic diet is high fat, moderate protein and low carbohydrate. And the breakdown varies a lot. We've got a question. You cannot see the second slide. Can everybody see the slides? Oh, you can now. Great. Thanks, Silvana. And I'll just pop that to the side. Okay, so it varies a lot in terms of the breakdown. So in and I'll talk a bit more about the various types of ketogenic diets, but that's roughly it. The Australian diet contains about 45% carbohydrate, so that's 229 grams of carbohydrate per day. So hold that thought. And looks like, here we go. The keto diets limit carb intake to around 50 grams per day. So you can see that's quite a big difference between carbohydrate intake for a ketogenic diet compared to the average Aussie diet. And of course, a lot of people eat a lot more than that too. I just thought I'd throw in a picture of a lovely ketogenic meal for you. And there are vegetarian meals as well. This is obviously salmon with some asparagus and cherry tomatoes and herbs and whatnot. I'm going to go through different meals that you can get, you can buy for delivery. I don't have any shares with them or anything like that. I don't get any kickback, but I was just doing some research just to give you a bit more information, and I'll be going through that in the second half of the webinar for you. So what is ketosis? And so the question is, what does it actually do? So it's by limiting carbohydrates, it leads to nutritional ketosis, where your liver produces ketones from fats. And this occurs when the blood levels of the insulin decrease, and your glycogen stores. So when you eat carbohydrates, the carbohydrates are converted into glycogen, and they're stored within the liver and tissues. And so you tend to burn that first when you're exercising or just for general energy. And then when you use up the glycogen, then your body can actually reduce the amount of insulin you're producing, and then ketones can be produced. And then the ketones provide the fuel for the body, all the cells in the body, including the brain. And the lowered insulin production will then promote fat burning in your body. So that includes the fat, the toxic fat, as I call it, or adipose tissue, which is the visceral adipose tissue that where the body stores fat around the organs. And so then, of course, as I just said, that stored fat gets converted into fuel, and you lose weight. So for ketoacidosis, which is something you don't want to develop, that is a life-threatening condition that may occur in people with diabetes. And so that's when the blood ketone levels become so high that they're dangerous. And often it's because of the patient or the person is not managing their insulin very well, or they get caught out. So it's definitely not the same as a healthy keto diet, because that state of nutritional ketosis is very safe, and you're very much not likely to develop ketoacidosis. So nutritional ketosis occurs when your body switches from that glucose to fat for energy. And you want to aim for blood ketone levels between 0.5 and 3. You'll find a lot of this information in your notes. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. And it can take up to 14 days to reach ketosis once you start a ketogenic diet. And if you have insulin resistance, it can take much longer, and you might need a bit of extra help. So things that you can do to promote ketosis are exogenous ketones, and I'll be talking a bit more about that later, coconut oil and MCT oil. So I'll talk a bit more about the MCT oil later too. So this is a really simple way of looking at how the carbohydrate diet works. So when you eat carbohydrates such as bread, then your glucose levels rise, and your body sends messages to the pancreas, or your brain does, to secrete some insulin to help to metabolize that glucose that's come from the bread. So then the insulin shuttles that glucose into the cell, and then you get that energy production. So in a keto diet, this is where already at the outset, because you're not putting food into the body to promote glucose production or glucose energy, then your body will release lipase, which is the enzyme that breaks down stored fatty acids, triglycerides, and then the fatty acids travel to the liver to then be made into ketones, which then produces energy. So it can take at least a few days to get into ketosis for somebody who's in fairly, in a shape where they don't have insulin resistance. So this is a bit of a chart to have a look at, where, this is the optimal ketone zone, where you want to at least be up to 0.5 of blood ketones, and ideally closer to 1. For my cognitive patients, I really like them to be 1, and between 1 and 2.5, or even 3. preferably, well, definitely not over 3, as you can see, because that's not a good place to be. And certainly you can see how high ketoacidosis is, and it would be quite hard to get up there unless you did have diabetes and absolute problems. And so aim for around this mark if you're going to be testing your blood glucose. I'll be talking about that too. So the types of keto diets, there's the standard keto diet, which is a very low carb, moderate protein and quite high fat. And it typically contains about 70% or so of fat. And this is in terms of calories, and 20% protein and 5 to 10% carbs. And in terms of grams per day, a typical standard ketogenic diet would be 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrate. This is per day, and 60 to 100 grams of protein. And the rule of thumb for that is to make sure you're getting at least 1 gram to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, when I talk about grams of protein, I'm talking about pure protein, which is the amount of protein within some food. So, for example, 125 grams of chicken would give you about 25 grams of protein. And if you'd like a chart with my protein and carbs on it, please write back to my email and just say, send me the protein chart. I'll be very happy to do that for you. So no set limit for fat, typically, because it's pretty hard to overdo fat on this sort of ketogenic diet. So then we've got the keto flex diet. So the keto flex diet is something that I recommend for my cognitive patients, particularly after they've been in ketosis for a while. And so you'd want to, or particularly for cognitive health, you want to be going on along in ketosis for at least a couple of months, and then you can start flexing. And the flex bit means really that it helps for them to maintain that metabolic flexibility. So where their body can switch between burning ketones for energy and then burning glucose for energy. But ideally, you want to really have 5 consecutive days of being in ketosis with up to 50 grams of carbs per day. And then you can have, a couple of days off for the flex part. So the strict keto diet is 20 to 50 grams of carbs every day. And the MCT keto diet, and that is where you have MCT oil. So I'll talk to you about MCT oil now, which is it's short for medium chain triglycerides, and this is extracted from coconut oil. So coconut oil contains about 60% of MCTs, and MCT just helps the body produce ketones. And a couple of notes with MCT oil, it's really useful at the beginning of a keto diet to help improve getting into ketosis. On the negative side, for some of my patients, if I've done their gene testing and I know that they are carrying what's called the ApoE4 gene, then I know that they're at more of a risk of a cardiovascular problem. And so I wouldn't promote them having the MCT oil for longer than a month or so. And that's because it's high in saturated fatty acids. Now, I know it's quite controversial about saturated fats and whether it does increase cardiovascular risk. But my main concern is that these people, when I know their genetic makeup, in terms of how they manage LDL cholesterol and saturated fats, the saturated fats can push up that LDL cholesterol, which I call them the bad guys, because the LDL cholesterol can become oxidized, and that can then start to form plaques in the arteries and so forth. So that's my little thing on MCT oil, but in the meantime, it's quite a helpful food to have. So then there's the targeted keto diet, and that's where the carbohydrates are consumed before or just after workouts. And that's so that you're kind of using them rather than storing them or, switching off ketosis. So the big question really for a lot of people who see me that I put onto keto diet is, should they be measuring the ketones? For my cognitive patients, yes, I definitely want them to be measuring them, because I want to be sure that they're reaching their ketone levels to a point which is really going to help their brain. And so various ways that you can do it is a finger prick blood test. And this is the most accurate. And this Freestyle Optium Neo is one of the gadgets that you can get for the finger prick blood tests. And they're relatively inexpensive. You do have to buy the test strips that you pop into the gizmo once you've put your drop of blood on it. And that can be a little expensive if you're testing your blood every day. I think, you probably want to test your blood very much daily when you first start doing the diet, just to make sure that you get into ketosis. But then you kind of get to know if your body is in ketosis or if you've clicked out. And I'll give you a few clues for that later. So it does measure ketones and glucose, but separately, not at the same time. And it measures beta-hydroxybutyrate, and that's ketones. So when we're talking about beta-hydroxybutyrate, you might want to hold that thought, because I'll be bringing that up a bit later. And you can measure ketones and then glucose, or the other way around. And you've got to be pretty quick, and it can be useful to know your blood glucose. For some of my patients, they have a lot of trouble getting into ketosis, so I get them to measure their blood glucose first for the first week or so I can see what's going on with that. Because if their blood glucose is higher than 5 or so, then they're not going to be producing ketones. And so this can be, a bit of an indication that they're having some problems with managing blood glucose metabolism. So this is, I've lost the price. I'm sorry about that. It's around $50 or so for that monitor. And then the strips are $8 for 10. So then there's a breath meter. So this is one that you can get online, and it actually measures acetone, not the beta-hydroxybutyrate. So it's going to be a different type of measure, and can be affected by methanes from carbohydrates such as resistant starch, which can be in some products, or alcohol. So you just have to be careful about when you're using this type of breath meter, just to make sure that you're actually reading the right thing. It does require batteries and recharging. And for a professional model, it's US $179 or $79 for a basic model. And you can have a look on the Ketogenic website. So there's also another breath meter, which I haven't mentioned here in the PowerPoint, but I'll talk about it now. And that's called BioSense. And one of my patients has a family member living in the States, and she actually got her family member to buy it for her in the States and send it to her. Now, unfortunately, BioSense aren't shipping to Australia at the moment. So if you're lucky enough and you have a friend or a family member in the States, you could ask them to get that. And that's the most accurate breath meter that you can get. And it's also the one recommended with the Bredesen Recode protocol, which is the protocol that I practice for my cognitive patients. So then there's the simple version. So if you're doing weight loss, then you might find that this is enough for you. And keto sticks are something you can buy. It's a urine dipstick type of test. It's not as accurate. It's adequate for weight loss, but not for cognitive health. It doesn't measure BHB, but it does measure acetoacetic acid, which is another ketone acid. And you simply place the keto stick strip, it's hard to say in one word, under the urine flow, and then you're matching the color that comes up on the stick with the container. And you want to go pale pink to a slightly darker shade, but not too dark. And so that can be quite helpful. And I used to get my patients to use that before I started working with the Bredesen Recode protocol. So when do you measure your ketones? That's a big question, and it's an important one because you want to make sure you measure at the right time. So firstly, after waking in the morning is a good time. And then just before breakfast, brunch. And usually that's the highest reading of the day. For some people, pre-bed is the highest reading. And pre-dinner or 2 hours after the last meal of the day. Now, I'm not suggesting that you're going to be pricking your finger that many times of the day, but you would certainly want to do it first, maybe before breakfast, if you're going to be doing the finger prick method, or before dinner, depending on how soon you'd eaten before that as well. But definitely before breakfast or brunch. And then I think that's going to give you a good indication of how things are going. And I've already talked about the goal and then the ideal levels for cognitive health. And as I mentioned before, for cognitive health, if you're looking after your brain or you're doing the following the Bredesen Recode protocol, then you'd want to stay in ketosis for at least 4 to 5 days consecutively per week. Just on that note too, so if you decide to do batches of days where you want to be in ketosis, it can take you a few days after having a little bit of carbohydrate on your non-ketogenic days to actually get back into ketosis. So that's something you'd have to kind of measure and just see, well, you know, how are you going with that? And are you really able to flex? So the factors affecting the ketones, exercise will lower the ketones due to the glycogen stores being released. Even in having low carbohydrate foods and vegetables, you may store a little bit of that carbohydrate. And so then the ketone levels usually increase after the exercise recovery. And that varies for everybody. I find, you know, with my patients, it does vary a bit. So eating too many carbohydrates, even the lower carbohydrates can push you out of ketosis if you're a bit sensitive, or having excess protein. So if you're having way too much protein, then your body can actually convert that into a carbohydrate. And so you might see ketogenic diets where it seems like you're just piling in heaps and heaps of protein. You don't want to do that because if you do, you're likely to be converting some of that into carbohydrate anyway. And then make sure you keep notes on how you feel at different ketone levels if you're measuring, because then that helps you to work out well, have I slipped out of ketosis? So, for example, if you've been going really well and then you notice that you're feeling a bit hungrier than before, or your cognition isn't working so well, you've got a bit of brain fog, or your energy's dropped, or your mood has dropped, it might be a clue that you've shifted out of ketosis. And this is where you might want to then test your ketones just to see, well, what's going on. And signs that you are in ketosis, which you definitely want to know, is when you don't feel hungry, you have really good mental clarity and focus and good energy and less cravings, and you might be a bit thirstier. On that note, it's a very good idea to drink plenty of water on a ketogenic diet. So there are some people who really shouldn't go on a ketogenic diet. And so they would be pregnant or breastfeeding women, definitely not a good idea for them. Babies and children, and that's, of course, unless that's a child with epilepsy and they're under good supervision. People with active gallbladder disease, so if you know you've got gallstones, you would want to tread carefully, and that is because when you eat fat, the gallbladder literally squeezes and releases bile into the liver. And so if you're having a lot of fat, your gallbladder is going to be working even harder to, squeeze extra bile into the liver to help break down the fat. And then that can disrupt gallstone and block the bile duct. I do know of a friend's friend who went on a ketogenic diet. I think she's a bit of a gung-ho person, this person, and she then ended up in hospital because she had gallstones and had a gallbladder attack. So I'm not saying that to scare you, but it's a good idea probably to go and check with your doctor. If you suspect you might have gallstones, then it's probably a good idea to go and have a abdominal ultrasound just to check out the state of the nation down there. Now, if you have gallbladder issues, the symptoms that you might suspect, this is just on a regular diet, is when you have a fatty meal, you might feel a bit icky, or you might get a pain under the right side of your ribs. And so that's something just to keep in mind. And it's not that you can't go on a ketogenic diet, but you certainly wouldn't want to go on the high fat version. Impaired liver function, because the liver does play a big role in that ketone production. So you'd want to make sure that you're in good health. If you've had gastric bypass surgery, your body probably wouldn't be able to cope with the amount of fat that you might have to eat. And people who've had that type of surgery know that they can be quite sensitive to eating various foods or quantities of various foods. So again, try it cautiously. Abdominal tumors, definitely not going onto a ketogenic diet. And history of pancreatitis. So pancreatitis is inflammation of the pancreas, and the pancreas also plays a role in fat breakdown in your digestive system. So the pancreas, while you've got the gallbladder on one side, injecting bile into the small intestine to break down fats, on the other side of the body, under the left side, you've got the pancreas, and that will inject enzymes into the body to break down fats. And people who've had a pancreatitis attack will know that having too much fat brings on that inflammation and feeling really unwell. So you would already know that if you've had pancreatitis, I'm sure. History of kidney failure. So if you've got poor kidney function, or like your kidneys, you've got, even stage 1 chronic kidney disease or chronic kidney failure, it's called, then it's important not to have too much protein in the diet. It's not so much the fat that's an issue there, but the protein. And impaired fat digestion. So some people, they don't produce enough enzymes to break down the fat. Now, let's say if that's the problem, and it's a fairly simple problem, you might want to take some digestive enzymes with your meals to help with that breakdown. So there's a bit more to do with who should not go on keto. And when I was talking before about doing gene testing, there are a few genes in the testing that I do at the practice that can show if you are likely to have problems with fat and gaining weight if you're on a higher fat diet. So, for example, these particular genes in the fat absorption, fat metabolism, and obesity risk section of the SMART DNA test that I'm talking about. And you can see in the top one here, increased sensitivity to saturated fats. And so it's actually recommended that they have 7%, less than 7% of their intake should not be saturated fat. And then for this gene here, there is an increased risk of obesity, particularly if they're sedentary and they have a high fat diet or even a high sugar diet. So either way it goes. So let's say if you're keeping up your exercise and you're on a ketogenic diet, you're going to be okay with that particular gene. I call that the fat sponge gene, by the way. And then we've got this gene here. This gene is very common, or gene variant, where it's a risk factor. It's in about 80% of the Caucasian population. And so, if you think about all the people that go on ketogenic diets and they lose weight, it's not necessarily going to be an issue, but it's just something to be aware of. So let's talk about going on a ketogenic diet, and you can actually have some side effects, and these are called the keto flu, and there's good ways of avoiding that. So symptoms, if you're going a bit too hard at ketosis, you might be needing to urinate a lot more, you might feel a bit tired and dizzy, and you might expect this in the first few days to week of going on a ketogenic diet. And low blood sugar symptoms. So low blood sugar symptoms are, if you've not experienced it, you can feel kind of a bit shaky if you haven't eaten, a bit of brain fog, feeling a bit anxious and agitated. Headaches. You can get headaches simply because of when you start on a ketogenic diet, you are breaking down fatty acids which can contain toxins. And so these toxins then circulate through the body, and if you're not detoxifying very well, and that's a whole other seminar really, but and that again would be a genetic predisposition, but let's say if that's occurring, then you can create headaches. Constipation, particularly if you're changing your fiber intake, and certainly I would promote having really good fiber on a ketogenic diet. You might get sugar cravings because really part of the reason of that is the microbiome in your digestive system is often calling the shots with sugar cravings. And we have a trillion bacteria in our digestive systems, and they need to be fed. And so if you've been having a high carbohydrate diet, then those microbiome or bacteria that you have living in your gut, they're used to being fed, and you're more likely to be growing the type of bacteria that want those starchy carbohydrates for food. And so they're going to be sending all kinds of messages to your brain telling you to eat carbohydrates. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. I often wonder who's actually running the show. Is it us or is it them? Diarrhea can be another thing, and particularly keep in mind if you have MCT oil, it can be quite stimulating to the bowels. And so you want to start slowly on that, you know, like around a teaspoon a couple of times a day, and preferably with meals so that you don't have too much of a laxative effect. Shakiness, and that can, of course, go with that low blood sugar symptom. You might get muscle cramps, and so muscle cramps might occur if you aren't getting enough magnesium foods in your diet and potassium foods. So sometimes if my patients are suffering from that, I might also supplement with a good magnesium supplement that contains some potassium as well. It can affect your sleep. Because carbohydrates are quite sedating, and on a ketogenic diet you're more alert, it can make you not sleep as well. For some people, other people sleep much better, and some people might get hungry during the night. And that's, remember, this is at the beginning of going on the ketogenic diet, not during it. This is all I'm talking about here, is that initial adjustment, your body trying to work out, well, what's going on here? Before you're giving me glucose, and now what am I supposed to do? And it's got to take that, or make the steps to then change the way it's producing energy. Palpitations can be another thing. Increased uric acid levels. Now, this is important for people who suffer with gout. Now, gout is caused by excess uric acid forming crystals in the joints of often the big toe. And so the best way to manage that is making sure you drink plenty of water. You might get the irrits because you haven't been getting your sugar fix. And you can have sore muscles. You might have stomach pains. And then let's get on to how to reduce the side effects, because we've been talking about a few, you know, negative things, but I'd definitely like to inform you so that you've got all that information and you know what to do. So let's talk about how to reduce it. So rather than going from one day going to glucose for energy to bang, you're going to ketogenic diet, you want to slowly reduce your carbohydrate intake. That's what I would recommend that you do. I always say to my patients, you're not robot. You can't just click from one thing to the other. So, and it does take time to, you know, kind of get your head around it, get used to a different program and a different way of eating. But so work your way up to it, even if you do it over a week or two, and then it's not going to be such a big jolt. You know, let's say if you go from having carbohydrates, you know, a cereal, starchy carbohydrate cereal at breakfast or toast, and then you normally have a sandwich at lunchtime and you might have pasta at dinner. Well, that's like carbs, carbs, carbs. So you would have maybe cut down to one meal where you're having carbohydrates and the other two meals more like a keto type of meal. And then your body will just gradually adjust to that, and then you can click into ketogenic diet. Drinking lots of water, I keep saying that. You might need those electrolytes. So an exogenous ketone supplement, and so that's BHB, basically, beta hydroxybutyrate, in a supplement form. And it's often bound, the BHB is bound with something like magnesium or potassium or even sodium. And then that helps your body to get into ketosis. And it also helps to reduce those side effects much better. Making sure that you eat more healthy fats. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about fats in the next section. Increase your exercise, because you're going to feel better if you get moving, get circulation going, and get plenty of sleep, because it is an adjustment for your body. It's really important that you include fiber, because what you want to do is you want to feed the good bacteria, the bacteria that aren't going to scream for sugars and carbs. And so what you can do during this process is to have psyllium husks and also chia seeds, or one or the other, and then that's going to help promote better microbiome. And particularly if you're getting cramps, you can add just a little bit of sea salt to your meals to help with the way that your body is metabolizing. So, keeping track. When you first start following the diet, it's a good idea to keep a food diary on an app, because then that's going to help you to work out what your breakdown of fats, carbohydrates are, and proteins, of course. And so there's a couple there. I quite like the Easy Diet Diary. It's Australian. It's an app that you can put on your phone, and it's very helpful to use. And also there's MyFitnessPal. So MyFitnessPal is an American one, but a lot of people in Australia use it. I guess the advantage with MyFitnessPal is you can actually use it on your laptop or iPad or whatever, and rather than just on the phone. So if you don't like, staring at your phone and doing stuff on there, you can keep track on your laptop. And so they're both easy to use, and you can keep meals, as favorite meals, so that you can just click on that and drop that into breakfast or lunch or dinner, rather than repeating everything again. So I find they're quite good. Right, so I'm just going to have a drink for a couple of minutes, and then I'll click back in. And so feel free to go and grab a drink, and let's say it's about 7:25. So would 3 minutes be enough for everybody, or 5 minutes? Hopefully that's okay for you. You can send me a message. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Julia. If you want to just let me know when you're back and ready to go, then I'll kick off again when everybody's ready. Okay, so 7:27. Everybody okay? Hopefully. Let's move along. Right, so in this next section, I'm going to be getting into more of the fun stuff, like things that you can eat and some food swaps and things like that. And I've also got some show and tell here, which I wanted to share the screen and show you some products that I've got here that I'd like to show you, things that are kind of my favorites. And hopefully you'll find that really helpful. So that's the big question, isn't it? Well, what do I put on my plate? And it's always the question, because a lot of people are very unsure what it means. So this is it's an American food pyramid, but as you can see, it's set it out quite nicely. So up the top, the sweeteners that you can use, definitely not the artificial sweeteners. So avoid those at all costs, because they can really muck around with your blood glucose levels. And they're also linked to an increased risk of stroke and Alzheimer's. So they're like your normal sort of diet drinks and things, or there are some food products with those artificial sweeteners. So basically what you're looking for are the ones that I've got on the list there. So fermented foods can be helpful in terms of looking after gut health. And nuts and seeds, so that's going to be fiber, and also throw in there that psyllium husk that I mentioned. And clean protein, so that's going to be grass-fed beef, wild-caught salmon or wild-caught fish, and pasture-raised, that's what they call it over there. We call it free-range poultry and wild game. And I will add to that, because not everybody wants to eat animal products. So I would add to that tempeh, tofu, and also things like protein powders that are vegan and low carb. Antioxidants, and so antioxidants are going to be in those coloured berries and all the beautiful veggies. I'll be talking a lot more about that. And good fats. So the good fats are your avocado, coconut oil, I would say organic butter or grass-fed butter, but I would still probably push for organic butter only. And the reason for that is that the cows that are having any of the grasses or so forth that have been sprayed with some kind of pesticide, they're going to store that pesticide in their fat. And so, of course, butter is fat, or it comes from their milk, which then, you know, that's going to be coming out as in their milk products. Pasture-raised or free-range eggs, extra virgin olive oil, coconut flakes, coconut butter. Now, bear in mind that coconut anything is going to be higher in saturated fats. So let's say if you've got a problem with your LDL cholesterol being too high, you probably want to go more for the avocado oil and the olive oil. And I also use a lot of macadamia oil because it's high in monounsaturated fats. So then this is more of the keto flex type of diet. And so they've got there the sweetener, which is stevia and monk fruit, cocoa. I use a lot of cocoa, and I also recommend to my patients, if they like chocolate, to have 85% or 90% dark chocolate. A bit of A2 dairy. So A2 dairy is considered to be less inflammatory than the regular dairy, which is A1 protein. So A2 dairy comes from goats and sheep, camel, if you're willing to try camel, also buffalo, and also the Jersey and Guernsey cows produce A2 dairy products. And so you can get beautiful sheep cheese yogurt and goat's yogurt by Meredith Dairies. I can never remember their Meredith Farm or Meredith Dairy, but they're fabulous. And so go for those. And my favorite sheep cheese is Manchego, which is a Spanish type of sheep cheese. It's terrific. But you might like goat's feta. And so that's a different type of food as well. So red wine in very much moderation. More on that later. So animal protein and fruits is the next in that category, and prebiotic resistant starches and probiotics. So you will see in the picture there's some sweet potato. So it's only like a very small amount of sweet potato that you can have. And they also have in their legumes, providing that you don't overdo it. But then the rest of vegetables, and you can see a huge array of non-starchy vegetables and healthy fats. And then this is something, fasting, this bottom layer of the Keto Flex food pyramid, a lot is to do with fasting overnight. And so the reason behind that is that fasting helps to promote something called autophagy, which is the clearing out of the brain toxic matter, and it also helps to clear amyloid plaque if there's any of that building up. So having a good fasting time of at least 14 hours overnight, for some people 16 hours overnight, and this is from when you finish having any calories at night to when you then have calories again in the morning. You can get away with just a little smidge of milk in your cup of tea or coffee in the morning, but anything more than 50 calories and you're switching off fasting. So you wouldn't buy, for example, a long mac at the cafe because the amount of milk that they put in it would just switch off your fasting. Now, I really do recommend that people do this if they can, or at least do it several days a week, because it helps to switch off anything that's going haywire. And that's partly, you know, the insulin resistance, cardiovascular issues. And it also helps with getting your body into repair mode rather than build mode. So if you're eating, your body is kind of more in that build mode rather than going into the repair shop for a bit. So in your notes, you would have found a ketogenic menu planner, and this gives you just some ideas of things that you can choose. And you noticed rather than calling breakfast, I've called it brunch, just to remind you but it's a really good idea to have a bit of a fasting time when you can. So, and then lunch, a lot of people, a lot of my patients, they actually have lunch as their first meal, and they'll have their lunch, you know, a bit earlier. To me, it's really brunch, whatever. But they might have their first meal, and quite a good meal then. And then they might have a bit of a snack in the afternoon, and then have a good dinner. But try and finish your dinner at least 2 hours before bed when you can. Some people work late, and so they can't manage that so well. So then you might want to push your brunch along a bit, just to help with that fasting time. And so also in your notes, you'll find this sample meal. And this is just, you know, it's kind of similar to what I might do, for example. So just talking about the food, actually I'll talk about food when I get up to a bit later on, but this is just to give you a bit of an idea of what you might put together. So any ingredients there that you're unsure of, such as Slendia rice style, I'll be talking about that a bit later. So that particular day, and that's the kind of breakdown of the macronutrients, as I call them. Macros are fat, protein, and carbs. And so you can see that, you know, 70% fat, it's actually not a lot. There's not a huge amount of fat in there. So you can see that the fat comes from, say, the coconut oil, the curry paste, the almonds, the chocolate. I'm a chocoholic, so I've always got to fit the chocolate in there. The mayonnaise, and there would be also a little bit in some of the fat. Oh, sorry, the bread, and that soy milk would probably have some fat as well. So you can see that that's not huge, is it? And then that's the calories. So it's a good idea on your ketogenic diet to not count calories. It's a different counting, depending on what kind of ketogenic diet you're following. So a couple of meals just to get you hungry again. So you can see that this meal, this is a ketogenic meal, but it's got a really fine shaving of a crouton in there, which in that ketogenic allowance, it's probably been measured so that it's not actually going over the carbohydrate content. And here's another one. And this is using zoodles. You know, you've probably heard of zucchinis being made into noodles. We've got a zoodler at home here, and we use that occasionally, or we might use the Slendia type of pasta, which I'll talk to you about. So now I want to go into some comparisons for you. And because a lot of people, I don't think they look at their nutrition labels very well. And so the nutrition, I might just unshare and show you this. So, oops, this is your nutrition label that you want to look at in your products. And this is where you want to look at your carbohydrates and so forth to make sure that you're not getting too much. And well, this is one of the products that I picked up today that I thought I would show you, which is perfectly acceptable to have in a ketogenic diet. And that's, you know, ready-made seed crackers. I tried one before, it was very nice. We've also buy these fairly regularly. And then I started just making my own. And in your recipe handout is a seed, ketogenic seed cracker recipe, which I really like. And I tend to make those a lot more than buying products. But let's say if you don't have time to cook and you just want something to have on hand, then this is really good. So I'm going to go back to my share screen. And so what I would like you to do is to get in the habit of looking at your nutrition information. So for example, a slice of regular wholemeal or grainy bread, which is 30 grams, is going to give you 12 grams of carbohydrate. So let's say if you're aiming for, about 50 grams per so of carbohydrate, that's going to really take up a big chunk of your day. And this is a bit more, so let's say in your recipe handout, and that's the picture down here in the bottom, that's my seeded keto bread recipe. And you can see one slice gives you 3 grams of carbohydrate. So you could even eat 2 slices a day of that and fit that into your program pretty well. And depending on the keto crackers that you get, so for these ones, for example, 20 grams is a serving size. I'm not sure how many crackers that is, but that gives you 2.4 grams of carbohydrate. That's for the little round ones I showed you. You can buy keto bread as well, and that's the Vernity brand. And you can see one slice will give you about 2.4 grams of carbs. And then there's Herman Brot. The keto bread and my seeded keto bread are gluten-free. The Herman Brot lower carb bread, which you can get from the supermarket, sometimes it's in the freezer section, and I think you can look up their website and they'll tell you where the stockists are. And that one slice will give you about 2.5 grams of carbohydrate. Just a note on that bread, I have had a couple of patients say that they do get a bit gassy with that. So, and that's because it's pretty high gluten, and they use a lot of gluten protein in there. So let's look at some carbohydrates. So some pasta and noodles and things. So this can be a bit of a problem, particularly if you love your spaghetti. And so some of the various substitutes for that would be this Slendia bean pasta. So this is the one down the bottom right. I think they've changed their packaging since then, because that's what I've got here. I'm trying to get that not to go weird. And you can see that this is the edamame pasta. It's organic. It's actually really good. We had it last week in a yummy pasta bake that I made. And it tastes, the texture is a bit more like pasta. And you can see that it looks like, fairly thin fettuccine, but it does thicken up and become tender like a pasta. And I liked it. I'll be using it again. And per serve, you can see for that, it will give you, and that's a dry weight of 85 grams, will give you about 8.5 grams of carbohydrate. They're now saying on the packet serving size is 50 grams, and that will give you 2 grams of carbohydrate. So maybe they've altered their recipe for actually making it. That's a great product. I recommend that one. And then you can get konjac pasta or rice. Now, Slendia is one brand, and this is one brand that we sell at Remedy at the practice, and it's called Zero Slim and Healthy Noodles. And they're more like slippery Asian noodles. They're not starchy. They're not going to absorb moisture from your dish. The Slendia one will. And so with the Slendia one, you actually have to cook for about 5 minutes in boiling water. Sorry, the bean pasta, the edamame pasta, you have to cook. But for the konjac pasta or rice style, you don't have to cook it. You just take it out of its cryovac pack. It's in a liquid. It smells a bit weird, but don't worry, you don't get that kind of smell in the food. And then you rinse it, pop it in a heat-proof bowl, boiling water on top, and stand it for a minute, and then drain it very well. I usually drain it and then toss it on in a bowl in paper towel just to absorb any extra water, and then serve it. With konjac, it's a terrific fiber for the gut microbiome. It's a vegetable, and it's literally like konjac flour that's been made into these noodles. And it's very filling. It's quite satisfying and quite a good carrier for, you know, if you want a spaghetti bolognese sauce or a vegan type of sauce, then it's fine as well. Now, compare that with your regular pasta or spaghetti and the amount of carbohydrate in that. So we're doing, you know, we're literally comparing 85 grams to 85 grams. And you can see that the konjac has no carbohydrates in it practically. And then the zoodles are really great. And then compare all of that with your white rice, brown rice, quinoa, and rice noodles. So probably the rice noodles are the least high in carbohydrate, but still they're going to push you way over a ketogenic diet allowance. So now we're looking at some of that dairy food that I was talking about. And you can see down towards the bottom, high-low milk or full cream milk is really high in carbohydrate. And also cow's yogurt is very high. Cow's milk yogurt is very high. And that is because, particularly the milk has got lactose in it. Even the lactose-free milk, they've put some kind of sugar in there. And so it's still going to be high in carbohydrates. And hopefully that chart will, you'll find that helpful. The harder the cheese, the less carbohydrate. And so you look at ricotta cheese, for example, the full cream ricotta is going to be better than the low fat ricotta because it's going to, when you take fat out, you get more of the carbohydrates proportionately. So that's why it's higher in carbohydrate. And so the camembert cheese, it does start life quite firm, but the fermentation or the maturing with the mold on it then softens it right down. So you can see that's still quite low carbohydrate. And on that note, there's chambray or camembert, I think it is. Chambray is a brand from WA, and it's a really beautiful sheep cheese product. I've popped down the bottom 2 unsweetened almond milk just to show you that it's really low carb. So if you're into smoothies, then you want to go for that or another low carb unsweetened food product or milk. Let's have a look at some more things. So I really love my vegetables. So vegetables are super important in terms of the antioxidants, the polyphenols that help to feed the good bacteria in your gut and protecting you against all sorts of disease and so forth. And this is a good selection of all the low carb ones. And I've tried to, in terms of the portions here, include what you would typically serve, you know, what you would eat, rather than 100 grams. If you compare 100 grams, obviously, you know, it's going to be a comparison for that weight. But I always find it much more useful to have a look at, well, what would I typically eat? And then we're sneaking up a bit. So you can see cauliflower, 4 florets, you know, and I have given a weight there because your floret might be a lot smaller than mine. And so just to give you a bit of a weight in terms of what to expect in those. And 5 Brussels sprouts, for example, roasted. And where these are cooked or whatnot, it doesn't really matter if they've been cooked with fat, because we're just measuring the carbohydrate content. And you can see that roasted eggplant. Eggplant, by the way, is a great cooked eggplant slices. You'd want to grill them first. They can be used in a lasagna dish instead of the pasta. And I think that's really worth considering. You know, those sorts of substitutes can really make a difference for, you know, changing a recipe into a more ketogenic friendly. And on that note, I have one of those flat sort of sandwich makers, and I quite often cook my eggplant in that, because you just have to make sure the slices are evenly sliced, brush them with oil, pop them in the sandwich maker until they're cooked. It's terrific. I do that with a lot of vegetables, you know, such as the zucchini slices. What else have I done? I've done red capsicum, and also even cooking things like lamb steaks and fish. It cooks really well in the sandwich maker. Okay, so now we're looking at some other vegetables that you might not have thought about, but are low carbohydrate. And so artichoke, the globe artichokes, artichoke hearts, celeriac, and I've put a picture to the left there so you can see what celeriac there. That's kind of funny, knobbly looking vegetable. It tastes like celery, and it's really delicious in a soup. Also, it's delicious in a mash. So you could combine celeriac and say cauliflower in a mash, and it makes it really delicious. So for swede, that's very low in carbohydrate. In terms of winter, because we're going into winter, and if you're thinking about making a nice vegetable soup, well, these types of vegetables mentioned here are probably going to be much better than looking at more of your potatoes. And one of the things I love doing is making a vegetable soup and then freezing it. And so that when we get tired home from work and we're tired and we don't feel like cooking, we've got a beautiful soup to cook, or to heat up, sorry. So here you can see these are the higher carb vegetables, and artichoke, Jerusalem artichokes, that's the picture to the left. And they're those funny little knobbly vegetables that you might have seen and not known what to do with. And they are really delicious roasted. If you haven't eaten them before, they can make you a little bit gassy. They're very high in a fantastic prebiotic fiber called inulin. And so just have a little bit, not a lot. That would be my advice, and, you know, work your way up slowly. So you can see corn, that's just a half a corn cob, quite high in carbohydrate, delicious as it is. And then even parsnips are quite high in carbohydrate when you think about putting that into a soup or roast parsnip. And then, of course, we're going into the higher carb ones, all the way down to white potato, which is really very high. Okay, so let's start having a look at some fruits. So in the Recode, the Bredesen Recode protocol diet, when people say, what fruit can I eat? This is literally what I tell them that they can eat. And I also mention olives and avocado because they're actually a fruit and not vegetables, even though I pop them with the vegetables. So you can see that blueberries are the higher in carbohydrates, and raspberries are terrific, and followed by strawberries, and followed by blackberries. And limes and lemons are great. You can have lime juice and lemon juice. And this is, I thought here, because coconut is actually a fruit, even though we pop it in with nuts. And that just gives you a bit of an idea of the carb content of that. With coconut water, it's generally quite high in carbohydrates, so be careful of that. So here's some other fruit, going from the lower carb up the top here to quite high in carbs. You can see a medium banana is very high. A medium red apple is quite very high. And a medium plum, this is a plum down here, is quite low, which is quite good. A medium peach, that would also apply to nectarine. Just 3 slices, 75 grams of mango is 10 grams of carbohydrate. Mandarin, so that's coming into season. So, you can see that you're probably better off even having half a cup of chopped rock melon rather than, some of these other fruits. And you probably didn't realize that rock melon's not too bad. So here we're looking at nuts. This one here is a pecan. That's a macadamia. I've popped down here chestnuts because chestnuts are in season this time of year. Is it this time of year? I think so. And quite often, if you like roasted chestnuts, they're quite starchy. That's probably why we like them. And you can see that, well, they are quite starchy. They're quite high in carbohydrate. Now, I purposely not put, oh no, I have put them there. There you go. I'll take that back. You've got cashews. You can see that a quarter of a cup of cashews is much higher than, say, a quarter of a cup of pecans or walnuts or hazelnuts. So they're hazelnuts there, and almonds and Brazil nuts. So the reason is that cashews are quite high in carbohydrate, obviously, as are pistachios. So they're probably a bit too high, but you could have a few in amongst your other lower carb nuts. So these are some of the sweeteners, and so the artificial sweeteners that fell out of my head before was aspartame and acylsulfame, and even sucralose I'm not very happy with, to be quite honest. So they're the artificial sweeteners, and I put a cross through these because I don't think these are good sweeteners. But the other ones over this side, of course, are okay. But here you can see this is sweeteners from bad to worse. So, so this is worse for blood sugar levels and less bad for weight and blood sugar. So that's stevia, erythritol. We've got Natvia, and that's stevia and erythritol mix. And then there's monk fruit extract. And monk fruit's quite good. And there's xylitol. So xylitol actually looks granulated like a sugar, and it can be quite useful. I was just looking to see if I had some show and tell on that, but I haven't. So in my cooking, I tend to use the Natvia, and I also use the monk fruit sweetener or the xylitol. It depends on what recipe I'm making and what I'd like the effect to be. Just be aware that anything ending with ol is it's called a polyol. And so if you're sensitive to FODMAPs, and again, that's a whole other subject, but if you've heard of FODMAPs, they can cause bloating and flatulence and unhappy tummies. And so if you're sensitive to those, then you might not cope with xylitol so well. I find that erythritol can be a little bit better in terms of that, but definitely not maltitol. Big cross and bones across that, because I find that's too gassy for a lot of people. And sorbitol is also on that list. Alcohol. So alcohol is a really good one to get a handle on. So I'm going to go down here. Whiskey, vodka, gin, just a nip of those is negligible carbohydrate. But once you add in mixes, if you're not adding soda, then you're adding in calories. So for example, a G&T over here, you know, a regular size would be, you know, 22 grams of carbohydrate. Even a Bloody Mary, a cup of Bloody Mary is going to be 10 grams. A lot of my patients, young patients, say, oh, I had a vodka cruiser, you know, I drink those when I'm out. And you can see a bottle of vodka cruiser is 25 grams. And a margarita is going to give you a good whack of carbohydrate, and an espresso martini certainly will as well. So, you know, cocktails such as Cosmopolitan, they're going to really push anybody out of ketosis. And this is just looking at low carb beer. There's that Pure Blonde ultra low carb beer, Cooper's clear low carb, rosé wine, white wine. You can see that dry white wine's not too bad, so you might cope with that. Red wine at 14% alcohol, 0 carbohydrates. So that's, you know, why in the Recode protocol keto flex diet, they say, you know, red wine might be okay. But it really depends on what's going on for the person. So that gives you a bit of an idea of, you know, what alcohols are best. But there's always a but, isn't there? Is alcohol okay on a ketogenic diet? Well, if you think about how alcohol is processed in the body, it has to be processed by the liver. And then what else are you wanting to make with the liver? You're wanting to make ketones for energy. So what happens, you know, the body is going to first have to deal with the alcohol, because it's a toxin. So it has to detoxify that and process it and move it along. So then that is going to probably slow fat burning, and it can affect fat loss. Also, there's a mental side, and that's, you know, what it's like if you have a drink and you might have another one, you go, don't worry about the ketogenic diet, I'll just have that big, fat, fluffy white bread roll. Or, you know, you might have the dessert, and it really does make you more relaxed and perhaps a little less likely to stick to your diet, unless you're stronger than I am. But it can also have more of an effect when you drink, in terms of the way that your body is processing your carbohydrates. So my recommendation is to have a low carb drink and minimize the amount, so that you don't push yourself out of ketosis, but, you know, so that you can still be social and enjoy yourself. So, you know, my go-tos that I'd recommend for my patients would be, you know, like a vodka or gin with soda and some fresh lime juice squeezed into it. Now, if you want to, you could add a little bit of monk fruit sweetener to make it more like a, you know, a sweetened gin and drink or something like that. And definitely don't use that lime cordial that's used in mixer drinks. So it might be okay, particularly if you're doing weight loss, not so much cognitive health, to have 1 day or to 2 days per week where you have 1 or 2 drinks, low carb, of course. This is my homeopathic alcohol drink, and I call it homeopathic because I use Angostura bitters, and Angostura bitters does have some alcohol in it, but because you're just having like a dash in the drink, it adds some nice flavor. And I also add to that half a teaspoon of organic apple cider vinegar and a good squeeze of fresh lime juice if we have it, and it's really nice. So it's the drink I'm having when I'm not having alcohol, and a lot of my patients really like that because they can still have it in a nice glass and feel quite special. So this is keto swaps, keto food swaps. So you would have guessed already from what we've been talking about so far, for noodles and pasta, you can make zoodles. That's a zoodler type machine here, and they're very easy to use, and you can do all kinds of vegetables with it. Also, for rice, you can make cauliflower rice, and that's something that's really simple to make. And what you do is you get your cauliflower florets, pop it in the food processor until it's chopped up finely, like rice size. And then you can stir fry that with all kinds of spices. You know, what you might want to do is even cook off a little bit of onion or chopped spring onions, and then add some spices and garlic. You can add your typical fried rice flavorings to it. And it really is really good. I like it a lot. So here's some more keto food swaps. Mashed potato, you can have cauliflower mash. And as I mentioned before, you could even add some celeriac to that for a bit of a celery flavor. Potato chips. So Swede fries. So this recipe, you can see it's from wholesomeyum.com, and there's keto rutabaga fries. So rutabaga is a vegetable quite similar to our swede, and as you would have seen before, the Swedes are fairly low in carbohydrates. So, you know, if you were really desperately missing fries, you could try making these into fries. So pizza, you can get keto-friendly pizza bases, and you can also make your pizza from cauliflower. That's a link to a recipe. I think I should have that in your notes. And so that's quite easy. Well, it is easy to make once you get the hang of it, but you process the cauliflower. In the recipe, you pop it in a glass, like heat-proof bowl, and microwave it for 5 minutes or so, and then you squeeze out all the water. You could also steam it if you like for 5 minutes and squeeze out all the water. And you need to put that into like a clean cloth and squeeze it out. And then you mix it with some grated mozzarella and spices and spread it out and bake it. And then you pop your topping on and you pop it back into the oven for a bit. It's actually pretty good, I have to say. You can also buy fat and seedy pizza bases, and that's the Primal Alternative brand. And so that can be quite a good mix, a good alternative. And there are some other keto recipes. I just ask you to avoid the ones that have got, you know, loads of cream cheese, particularly if you have high LDL cholesterol. So for potato crisps, you can make kale chips, or you can make seaweed chips or crisps. So the kale chips, there's lots of recipes on the net. We've also got a recipe there's a recipe in my handout. And this is the picture from the well-nourished toasted seaweed chips. So I put that there so that you can look up well-nourished. So well-nourished is by a naturopath over on the Gold Coast, I think. She's in Queensland. She doesn't necessarily specialize in ketogenic, but I thought that particular recipe is perfect if you like munching on healthy chips. So this is cheese and crackers. So I've already shown you the pepita seed one of that, and this is Olena's sunflower seed. And as an example, there's 6 servings in a pack. I'm not sure how many crackers are actually in there, but per serving, it's 2.3 grams of carbohydrate. So it's pretty good. And this is a Lamington recipe from Aussie Keto Queen. And this is a keto Lamingtons. And she makes like a raspberry chia puree that she puts in the middle of her keto Lamingtons, which looks really yum. I haven't made it, but if you do, send me an email and tell me what you think. I think they look really delicious. But you'll find that almond meal or coconut flour is used quite a bit in recipes for cakes and things like that. I did find this too. It's not that inexpensive, but it's a product called Keto Bread in a Mug. I might just stop share and show you a couple of products. So Keto Bread in a Mug. So you can see it's just a sachet. I think it was around $5, so it's quite expensive. But the products, the ingredients are almond meal, linseed meal, psyllium husk, gluten-free baking powder, whole linseeds and chia seeds. And you have to add a tablespoon of butter, nut butter or oil, and a tablespoon of cream or yogurt and 1 egg, and mix it all up. Now you will find in your recipe mix handout mug muffin. I think it's keto mug muffin, and that is really easy to make as well. But let's say if you haven't got time to measure out all your ingredients, this is quite a handy one to get, and there's 3 different flavors. I actually got this from Peaches in South Fremantle. So I might just talk to you about snacks, because a lot of people have sugar cravings, and so this is a really good snack. It's Locaco Nootropic Keto Bar, or it's called Keto Collagen. And nootropic means that they've actually got some ingredients in there to support cognitive function, such as lion's mane, which is a type of medicinal mushroom which helps with cognitive function, and Siberian ginseng, and some MCT powder, along with a lot of other ingredients. And it's actually a really good product. It's sweetened with monk fruit sweetener. And I quite like it, but it has got the saturated fat in there, of course, from the MCT oil, but not too much. So I think as far as a snack goes, it'd be quite good. And they've got a few different flavors. So that's another one. I really like Naked Keto bars. So in terms of carbohydrate, this is 5.5 grams. And this, the Locaco one, is 3.6. So this is going to be higher carb. You'd have to take that into allowance when you're measuring things. And then that one's lower. And then a lot of people say, well, you know, I'm entertaining and I want to get some cakes. I haven't got time to make them. What should I get? So the Sugarless Bakery, they do a good range of keto products. And so this is a lemon coconut one. You can see I tried a bit of that today, and I have tried it before, and they're really yummy. These are sweetened with xylitol. But this one's vegan, so it's dairy-free, and they're also all gluten-free and so forth. So great products. They do a whole range of all sorts of things. And if I've got to take afternoon tea somewhere and I need it to be keto, then I buy some of these. So I think that's the end of show and tell for now. I'll go back to sharing the screen. So I hope you found that interesting. Just back on that other one. This is a picture of the the seeded crackers that are on my website, my Food, Body and Health website. I just thought you might like to see that. So let's talk about different herbs and supplements and things like that that might be useful for when you're doing a ketogenic diet. So curcumin is anti-inflammatory. So sometimes if you have a lot of systemic inflammation, it can kind of prevent you from getting into a ketogenic diet properly or getting into ketosis properly. And so, or if you have joint problems and so forth, curcumin from turmeric is very helpful. Saffron is a mood enhancer. It's often included in supplements for mood. St. John's wort for low mood. And I'm talking about mood issues because sometimes the reason people crave carbohydrates and sugars is because then, they have problems with having a low mood, and then that can be helped by some of these beautiful herbs. Now, St. John's wort can't be taken with some medication, so you'd probably want to get some professional advice on that, but it's a wonderful herb. Withania it's also called ashwagandha. It's an Indian herb. And it's wonderful for adrenal support and for cognition. Rhodiola is another adrenal support, which really helps when you're under stress. Cinnamon, and that's proper cinnamon, true cinnamon, and in a proper supplement, don't have lots of cinnamon spice because you don't know if it's the proper medicinal version, but it's very helpful for blood glucose support. Gymnema is a herb that's quite often used in herbal mixes for blood glucose management. And coleus is a herb for thyroid, blood glucose, also just through that weight management. So fish oil, also anti-inflammatory. SAMe is a mood support nutrient. And activated B vitamins are great to support the metabolism, digestion, mood, the nervous system. So there's those exogenous BHB ketone salts for fat burning. And so that can be really helpful to help you get into ketosis. Vitamin D is really, really important. And on that note, I like my patients to have their vitamin D levels up to around 100 on their blood test. So keep that in mind if you get your next blood test done. Acetyl L-carnitine is a nutrient that helps the body to release fat from cells to be used for fat burning. And so it's very helpful also for cognitive health and brain energy. Chromium is a nutrient that is helpful for blood glucose support. And resveratrol, usually not so much from red wine. You do get a little bit from red wine, but preferably from something like Japanese knotweed or pine, maritime pine, is a great antioxidant. So now let's talk about some beneficial foods. So eggs for choline, if you're not vegetarian or vegan. So eggs for choline to help with cell membranes and brain health. Green tea helps with fat burning and metabolism. glutathione food. So glutathione is a nutrient that's really important in detoxification, and it's an antioxidant. And so thankfully it's high in your lovely low carbohydrate vegetables. The red and orange lower carb vegetables, so think red and yellow capsicum, carrots. What else is red? I'll leave that one with you. And then seaweed for iodine and thyroid support. And probiotic rich foods, and that's for gut support. Right, so going out for dinner, what do you eat? Well, the first thing you've got to do is think protein and low carb vegetables. So say you're ended up at a burger place and you don't want to be the one that's causing issues. So you can always ask for the burger without bun. Grilled, the chain of burger places, Grilled, they have a pretty good low carb option. So it's more like a flatbread bun, but with a low carb bread. And I was really happy when I saw the nutritional information on that, because it gives people a bit of an option. A chicken and vegetable stir fry without the rice. Vietnamese pho, which is the Vietnamese brothy soup with vegetables and a protein such as chicken or tofu or beef, but ask them not to put the noodles in it. Frittata or omelette with spinach or rocket, so vegetables rather than toast. Grilled fish with salad and green beans. And tandoori chicken or lamb with a vegetable curry, but ask if they have cauliflower rice. There's a restaurant near us that they actually have cauliflower rice on the menu, and you can get a good low carb meal there, which is wonderful, and it's really delicious. A few keto meals just to make you hungry. And this is eating in options. So if you're looking at delivery, the Thrive meals have some options that you can go for. That's a couple of their meals. Hail the Kale is a local company as well. And they do low carb, really healthy, delicious low carb things, meals. And I'd recommend them. I have actually eaten their low carb meals and I like them a lot. That's another one. So that's I think that's a salmon dish. This is My Muscle Chef. This is when I was researching to see, well, what meals can you get delivered or buy. My Muscle Chef, you can get those. And then there's some more resources. And so Taste, these are different websites where they have various recipes, like ketogenic recipes. They have like a whole range, but they've got keto sections. And so they're definitely worth having a look at. And I will be sending you this link so that you can go back and have a look at all of this in your own time. So I just want to stop the share, and I want to show you a couple of books. So I know I've put some books in your handout, but this one is a fairly new one by Michael Mosley. It always goes weird, so I've got to put it so you can see. So Dr. Michael Mosley, he did the fast diet, and the Fast 800 is his most recent one, but then there's the Fast 800 Keto. So I was really keen to see that. And so let's say if you're interested in weight loss, then following this would be a helpful way to, initially get into some weight loss using the ketogenic diet, and then you could kind of shift into more of a regular ketogenic diet, or depending on, you know, how you go, you might be able to go more keto flex. But I quite like what's in there, and I really love his work. I think he does some fantastic research, and I'm quite happy with that. This is something that we can get for you, I think, at the practice if we haven't got it on the shelf, and that's the Shake It recipe book. One half is low carb and the other half is ketogenic. So there's some nice recipes in there. I like this one a lot because it's for vegetarians. Sorry about it going weird. So it's by Dr. Will Cole. That's in your handout. So see if I can find some food pictures. And I like the fact that it's keto, but vegetarian, just so that you don't have to feel like you've got to. That's a cauliflower fried rice bowl, by the way, with a cooked egg on top. Yum. So just so you don't feel like you've got to have masses of meat, and definitely I think it's really important to push for a range of foods and not hammering the animal protein. So that's a lovely salad bowl. So then there's good old Pete Evans. He likes to be controversial, but his Easy Keto book is quite useful. He does tend to use a lot of the saturated fats. So, but he also has, you know, quite a lot of dishes using olive oil and other healthy oils. And my recommendation would be just to substitute, you know, where needed, with some healthier fats. So that's for meat lovers. That's a minute steak keto recipe. So there's really lovely recipes in there. And then the Women's Weekly, Keeping It Keto. I don't know if you might not know, but I used to work at the Women's Weekly Test Kitchen, and when I was a food editor, and I used to love working on the cookbooks, but really nice recipes such as roasted tomato cheesecakes with olives. So keto certainly doesn't have to be boring, and there's so much interest in it at the moment that there's loads and loads of recipes and inspiration everywhere. So has anybody got any questions that you'd like to ask? You can type it in the chat box. It seems like I might have answered all your questions, and if that's the case, I'm really, really happy. But look, if you feel like you want to drop me a line after the seminar or the webinar, please do. Would you recommend gene testing before starting keto? I think that's up to you. The Smart DNA test that we do is it's a very comprehensive gene test. And so that's just one of the gene tests out there. And we charge $525 for that. That gene test includes about 160 gene SNPs, and that includes a whole bunch of health areas such as weight loss, mood and cognition, cardiovascular, detoxification, food and vitamins, you know, if you're likely to be deficient in various vitamins and minerals and so forth, and also inflammation, if I didn't say that already, oxidation. So it's a really terrific test. So So I think that it would be up to you, but personally, I think it's a great help. So that probably answers your question. But I just wanted you to know the cost and how much you actually get out of it, the good value. The methylation gene, that's the MTHFR gene, does one tend to process fat more slowly? So not that gene alone, no. It will slow, it will slow the enzyme production for your methylation, but it's not necessarily going to affect your fat burning per se. So HbF, HbF, a question there about my consultations and if HbF covers them. If you have the top cover, which includes nutrition, yes, HbF will cover, will give you a rebate for my consultations. So that answers that. You're very welcome, Jenny. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And lovely. Thank you, Marinka. So thank you, Robin. And I'm glad you all enjoyed it. And it was really lovely to present to you tonight. It's kind of weird not seeing you and hearing you, but I know you're there. And it's been lovely talking to you. So maybe I'll see you at the practice. Thank you, Julia. And I hope I've answered all your questions. Thank you, Savannah. So have a lovely rest of the night. And if you see me at the practice, tell me who you are. Thank you very much. Thanks, Frank. I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.